Hello, my name is Zach Rye with Old Man Gaming, and welcome to another Snap Judgment review. What is a Snap Judgment review if you've never heard before? Well, sometimes I think game reviewers get a little bit caught up with 100%ing a game or getting to the near end, and they forget what it was like to just play it right off the bat. So I only do about 5 to 10 hours with the games I review. I'm trying to give you an idea whether you're going to enjoy it right away or not. That coupled with the fact that I think games are one of the most subjective forms of art, I don't give scores in this review. Instead, what I'll tell you is an overview of what the game is. Then I'll list the pros and the cons of the game that I noticed with my time with it, from my point of view, of course. And then I'll tell you whether I personally will be sticking with the game outside the purposes of this review or DLC once I'm done with it. That being said, anybody who's a long-time listener of this channel and has thought to yourself, man, Zach never admits when he's wrong, well, be prepared because this is the episode for you. I am reviewing Avowed, Obsidian's new fantasy RPG. Does it hold up? Does it hold muster compared to its last two outings, which were Grounded and Outer Worlds, which were both stellar games? So, what is Avowed? First of all, it takes place in the Pillars of Eternity universe. If you played those CRPGs, Bali for you. I did not. So maybe I'm missing some of the finer details of the storyline, but for the most part, you play something called, I believe, a godlike, I think is what they're called. Somebody born with this kind of weird defect on their face that's like a mushroom or like a root or something growing out of it. And you're somehow connected with the gods. You go through a character creator right off the bat. However, the character creator is limited to just humans or elves. And then you can make, obviously, female or male characters. You go through that character creator, which is pretty decent given what it is, given some of the options, which we'll talk about later in the cons. But once you've created your character, you get the backstory that you work for the Adria. Not good with fantasy names. Their empire, as a godlike, you are an envoy of the emperor, and you have to go to this kind of like faraway land called the Living Lands, and you're going there to try and help basically the colonization of that area, and aid or kind of get a foothold. The Living Lands is an extremely dangerous place where there's all sorts of manner of creatures and beasts. The wild seem to overgrown and all sorts of stuff. Once you get to the area, some stuff happens. I don't want to do spoilers here, but overall you're fighting something called the Dream Scourge, which is this kind of evil virus that's kind of taking people over, making them do bad things, making them kill, and you're trying to get to kind of the root of that. While also obviously getting involved in some side quests and some other shenanigans and whatnot. To do that, you have a skill to basically, like most open world RPGs, this falls right in there. Kind of similarly with like Outer Worlds. The thing is, though, that this game doesn't lose sight of is it doesn't lose sight of what should be the focus of open world games, which is player interaction and player agency in those worlds. What am I talking about? I'm talking about if you were to compare this to an Ubisoft game, which is just basically like tons of icons on a map to have you go fetch things and do things, but you don't really help or hurt anything in the world itself. It's just clearing tasks to clear tasks. Whereas this seems to have you actually influence the characters and people around you, which was much more like what Outer Worlds was, which is really good. I really enjoy that. You can do magic, ranged attacks, or close combat attacks. There's a wide range of weapons, and every one of them feels very different. You can dual wield those weapons to kind of give up your defense and blocking ability, but give you some more offensive options. Or you can do shield and a close combat weapon, or just a big two-handed macho weapon. There is an interesting level of timing to the blocks. Nothing that I saw that like indicated a perfect parry or anything, but the fights seem really interesting and into it. We'll get a little bit more into that in the pros and cons. But they have kind of a meat, and all the weapons feel very different. The magic I did not play with for a little bit, and I'll explain why as we're starting the pros and cons, because I did a very specific run of this, and again, I'll explain why in a second. But the magic is kind of if you can learn the spells, and then you can, if you dual wield the same spell, it increases the power of the spell, or you can have two different spell effects kind of throwing around. So there is a lot of really cool, interesting magical potential here. Just to give you an idea of the player agency, there was a character that I ended up getting in a fight with, probably earlier on than I expected to, just because of some dialogue choices. That fight was brutal, long, but I managed to survive, managed to pull it out, and it changed some of the way the interactions happened with me going further in that area, which I thought was really cool. I've kind of come to the idea that what fight was going to happen eventually, but the fact that I kind of chose where it was due to story options gives you this feeling of like, hey, you're part of the story, you're part of it, you're influencing the world, not just having the story regurgitated through you as you move from fetch quest to fetch quest. There are 4 companions that can join you on your quest. You can have up to 2 of them in your party, I believe, at the same time. I've never found more than 2 yet, but you can have at least 2, and they're useful. I've definitely seen some reviews where they're constantly going down. I'm playing this on normal, so just keep that in mind. But I've never had a problem with them going down or not being useful. They've only gone down maybe a handful of times, and they were kind of reasonable times to go down. I also really like the severity of the damage you're taking. It gives kind of a realistic feel to it. If you get hit with a sword, you're going to lose half your health. And I enjoyed that. There's then this weird tacked on kind of camping system that I don't know if you really need there, but you can at any point in time choose to camp. When you choose to camp, you go back to your camp, you can have your discussions kind of a la Baldur's Gate 3, but you can also do a bunch of, that's where you do all your upgrading of equipment, which is a very interesting system so far. Basically, every weapon, every item you can upgrade, and then you have levels of what that item looks like at that level, which compares to all other items out there, which makes things very interesting there. I feel like the first 2 weapons I got, if I like them, I could just keep upgrading them and keep them on par, which is something a little bit different than these games usually do. Usually when you have a game, even with an upgradable weapon, there's a point where you're like, that steel sword just isn't going to cut it. You need an obsidian one. Whereas now it's like, okay, I got my common pistols. I like my common pistols. I'm just going to keep upgrading them. I think that's a very interesting way to go about this game, and I enjoyed it. It definitely gives me more weight to crafting, and just because I'm not like, well, the crafting is going to run out, the upgrades are going to run out, it doesn't matter. Alright, let me dive into, before we get into the pros and cons, the very specific 5 hours that I played with this game. Okay, so I watched a lot of reviews on Avowed, and if you are a longtime listener of this channel, of me and the podcast and any of that sort of thing, you may have heard me bashing Avowed's lead up, its development, its developer directs. I thought they were less than stellar. The game did not look interesting. It didn't look good to me. With that being said, as you kind of like, as I kind of went into this, I watched a lot of reviews. I have PC Game Pass still, so it was on PC Game Pass, so I was debating whether or not I was going to put it on my hard drive. And I have an older computer, which we'll also get into in pros and cons. A small SSD that this would take up most of my space, and a graphics card that is actually ranked slightly lower than the graphics card they say is required. So I wasn't even sure if I was going to step into this pool. A lot of the reviews said that it's a good game. They enjoyed it. But a lot of them were very high on the magic. They said that all the combat fun is in the magic. So I really wanted to hammer home on that. And by hammering home on that, I mean avoid magic altogether. I wanted to see, is this game fun if I don't ever pick up a spell book and I don't ever cast a spell and I don't ever enchant anything? So my 5 hours, I settled in. I played some close combat weaponry at first. Then I switched to long-range weaponry. But I didn't want to do the standard long-range archer, stealth archer kind of trope, so I decided to switch to 2 pistols because you can dual wield anything. And I gotta say, really fun. We're gonna get into that, but I want you to keep that in mind for the rest of this review, is that I wanted to specifically test what people said was not specifically that fun about this game, and I found it very fun. So let's get into pros and cons. Pros is combat. Combat is great in this game. I would say arguably better than Outer Worlds or Skyrim. There is a weight to the attacks that you just don't usually get in games like this. I play all games like this in third person. These games are usually meant to be played in first person, and that's why they key the animations the way they do. In third person, this works great, and it still feels weighty. The attacks seem to hit with kind of a thud, and the enemies seem to react to them. It's not like the old days of Skyrim where you're just swiping at something and you're seeing kind of like a blood indicator and then it eventually dies. This is definitely like they've got the feel of combat in there, which I really enjoyed and I wasn't expecting in any way, shape, or form. The range, anything you hold, you can overcharge. Now, I don't know about the wands, but overcharge just means holding the attack for a power attack. You think, oh, every game's got this. And it does. But what this game does that's interesting is either hand you can hold for a power attack and do weird different cycling things. There was at one point that I was holding a dagger in my left hand and a sword in my right. I don't have footage of this, of course. But I would power up my sword for the big power attack, power up my dagger, hit with my dagger, which is this repeated stab attack, and then while they're kind of stun locked, hit with the big sword attack. The same with the guns. The guns, you can unlock some cool abilities in the skill tree where it slows time every time you hold for that power attack, every time you charge your weapon, which to me was cool. It kind of felt like I was playing Fantasy Max Payne for a second. And then dodging back and forth and headshotting people with my flintlock pistols while my companions were doing damage was just a lot of fun and really interesting. The battles have been surprisingly cool. They do tend to be a little arcadey with how fast they go and how dodgy your character ends up being if you're not playing a tank. But it's really, really, the fun factor is there. And I was surprised by this. I was really expecting to go in and meet some lackluster on a lot of aspects. And I didn't. Which brings me to my next pro, which is the dialogue of this game. I'm going to talk about the writing a little bit in the cons, which might be a controversial topic, so we'll get to that in a second. But the writing of the dialogue in this game and the way your player interacts with the NPCs, second to none. First of all, when you're making your character in the beginning, you get to pick kind of a backstory, and of course you also have your stats. What's interesting is there are unique dialogue options for every stat and every background. So that will pop up randomly and allow you a ton of different options about how you interact with the NPCs in front of you and how you talk to them. I found that really cool. It made the conversations interesting. It brought me into the conversation other than me just trying to click through to get the next quest. And it ingratiated me to the people of the world a lot more than a lot of games do. Player agency is right now my number one with a bullet, and Avowed really gives you a lot more than I expected from all of their trailers and whatnot. The dialogue is great. It's heady. It's good. The characters make sense. Nobody's saying things randomly because of anything other than what their character would be. I really enjoyed that. I enjoy the conversations around the campfire with my companions, which is not something I will say for every game that I play. A lot of times I'm like, great, I've got to do another campfire conversation just to build my relationship with them. But this, it definitely didn't feel like a chore. It felt like more of a game, and I really enjoyed that. And I think a lot of it stems from the just sheer amount of ways that you can interact with the conversation. And that brings me to the voice work. Voice work, stellar here. Absolutely stellar. The guy who plays Kai is Garrick from the old Mass Effect games. He's kick-ass, but just because he's good doesn't mean everybody else isn't good, and everybody else is great. Even the NPCs, I'll say some of the animations when they're talking seem very stock, the shrugs, the kind of weird fidget eye rolls and stuff, the one hand gesture they all have. But the actual voice work is great, even for characters that don't seem to matter in any way, shape, or form. And I enjoyed that quite a bit. That brings me next to the next pro, which we've already talked about a ton, so I'm just going to touch on it. That's player choice. Outer Worlds was phenomenal at player choice. It's one of the reasons I love that game so much, is you had so many options when you create a character, and you had so many options of how to play that game. Was it the same basic few areas every time? Yes, but there was just so many ways to get through those areas, to interact with those areas, and change the storyline going forward. That's something I love in games. And this game does that so far. I haven't gotten to the end, so I don't know if it becomes stilted later, but right now it feels very like my decisions are influencing things and changing the way the world is. I will say the character creator, we're going to talk about how there are some options that I wish were there that aren't there. But yeah, overall, like, really good player choice stuff. And then that brings us to cons. So cons, these are the negatives. This first one I'm going to touch on, and I'm going to touch on this only slightly because nobody else has touched on this one. Everybody else has said, this game runs great. It runs absolutely great. Now, I want to keep in mind that I've already pointed out to you guys, I am running this on a computer that is slightly below the recommended graphics card. They require a 5700 XT AMD. I'm running a 5600 XT AMD. That is the only off thing. Everything else I've got, but I'm pretty low on the minimum requirements, and it runs pretty decent. That being said, I have encountered some bugs. I've definitely encountered some bugs. I had one bug where a character, where it basically failed to load the land in front of me, and I fell off the side of the world into an infinite fall loop. I had another one where there was some objects that were just floating around. I had another one where a guy was walking out of the tavern. He stopped walking, and he just started floating forward and T-posed up some stairs. They're far and few in between. And I am running it on a computer that does not have the recommended specs. So, I think that it can be expected. But, I just want to point it out that as good as it's run for everybody else, it did not run as good for me. Good, great compared to some of the other games I've played, but not perfect. My next con everybody's talking about. Bears, man! Why are there so many damn bears? There's bears everywhere. You're constantly fighting bears. You will be fighting two bandits, bears will attack you. You'll be fighting this guy over here, bears will attack you. You walk around a corner, bears are there. There are bears everywhere in this game. Like, absolutely everywhere in this game. And it is weird. Like, it's not necessarily detracting from the fun of it, because the bear fights are fun. But, like, why are there so many damn bears? They're everywhere. Okay, getting back into the seriousness of it. I got a couple more cons. My first one is lack of procedural generation anyway. And I know what you're saying. This isn't a procedurally generated game. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like this should be like No Man's Sky or something like that. But when everything in this game is placed there. It is placed there by a person, and it's there. So if you kill a person, that person's dead. They're not coming back. They're dead. Their body will stay there. I think their bodies evaporate eventually, but they're dead. That gets a little obnoxious. Like, when you're in an area and you're trying to 100% that area, after you've run out into the wild for like 4 or 5 quests, you've already run into everything you needed to run into or accidentally run into. So your battles start to get shorter and shorter and shorter, and the world starts to get emptier and emptier and emptier because it doesn't repopulate. I'd like some procedural generation for bad guys. Just a little bit, like, okay, some spiders spawn here or some outlaws spawn here. Just something, some reason to come back to these areas. Like, I haven't left the first area. Obviously, I'm still in my first 5 hours, and I'm doing a lot of side quests because I find them very interesting in this game. But I'm going to say this. Once I'm done with this area, everything's going to be dead other than the people in the city, and there's just not going to be any reason to come back, and that's kind of a bummer. I'd like a reason to come back. So I think the only way you do that is with some, like, enemy spawns around the map here and there. They don't have to be a ton, but something, like throw something in there, because after you've done a couple of expeditions into the wild, you've carved your path. And that path is free of bad guys because you murdered them all. And that's that. The world's empty. And especially with a place called the Living Lands, doesn't really make sense. I mean, heck, this background of this story is that the Living Lands is growing so fast that the people have a hard time living there. Like, producing so much stuff so fast. So why aren't they producing more bad guys? I don't know. I'd really like to see some more bad guys added here, or some spawns of some sort. My next big two. These are my big two cons. The biggest takeaways that I didn't like. This first one, from what I understand, it's like a Pillars of Eternity story beat. Like, if you're a godlike, you have to either be a human or an elf, period, from what I understand. Or at least from the Adar Empire or whatever. This backstory empire. Okay, fine, but you hamstring yourself a little bit, especially when you had Outer Worlds, which had just so many creating character options. This one limits you to just two races, the elves and the dwarves, even though there's all sorts of different races that I don't even know the names of. There's obviously dwarves out there. There's also these weird fish people. There's these weird furry big-eared people. All of these things I would like to play. I would like to see them in the game, but you only get to play elves or humans with godlike forms. So I don't know if it's like a godlike thing or the Adar Empire thing, but I wish that there was a way that they could have worked in more character creation options racially. Just to make some more interesting builds would be kind of cool. That being said, I do want to just point out they do give you a ton of like backstory options and stuff like that, which keeps things interesting. There's definitely a reason to make a new character and go back through the game. I just wish there was some more species that you could play. It brings me to my biggest con, and this is probably most controversial. Some people will agree with me, and some people will disagree with me. I don't know. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. My biggest thing with this is the story. Not the writing of the characters, but the story. The overall story feels very Baldur's Gate 3. Like you've got the weird, ethereal, godlike creature in your head that you don't know if it's good or bad, talking to you the whole time, and you're trying to figure out if it's good or bad while you're fighting this thing that's kind of like a virus that's killing people and also turning them crazy. And I don't know if it's going to differentiate it later. I've only played 5 hours, as you guys well know. That being said, even down to the camp system. I don't understand why the camp system is there. Why can't we just talk to our people when they have a bubble above their head? Why do we have to go to a camp? And why can't you just put this is the place that you do workshop stuff? Why do you have this weird kind of rest system that doesn't need to be there? It's almost like there's certain aspects of this that they were like, hey, Baldur's Gate 3, you like that? This has that kind of thing. Do you like that? Which I don't think this game needed. Is very weird. And again, they were in development very similarly, very overlapping. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but for the first 5 hours of Avowed, I kept feeling like I was playing the story of Baldur's Gate 3, but in an action game. And I don't like that. I want it to be a little bit more unique, feel a little bit more unique. And again, the gameplay itself completely different. Obviously, Baldur's Gate 3 is a turn-based strategy game based on D&D. This is an action RPG down to its core. They're very different. But there's also a lot of weird similarities that I just can't help but mention in this. So yeah. So I don't know. Do with that what you will, I guess. So whether or not I'm going to stick with this outside the game, yes, I am. I am really enjoying this. It's one of those games that I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to play that again. And that surprises me. I am very much enjoying the combat. I love that the weapons all feel very different. They all have very different power attacks. It urges me to go out, make new characters, find new weapons, do different things. And I think that is really going to be fun in the future with this. It definitely gives me an Outer Worlds in the fantasy kind of mix. Would I have loved things like romance, more companions, stuff like that? Yeah, definitely. But it is still great for what it is, and it really gives you a good player agency over the game. So, I don't know. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? You guys can tell me in the comments below. You can also reach out to me on Discord. The link is in the description below. You can influence this and all of our shows from there. You can also contact me on Facebook at OldManGamingDH. You can contact us on X at OldManGaming9. And you can find us on Blue Sky. Just search Axiom Games LLC /OldManGaming. And as long as you guys keep watching and listening, I'll keep making them. See you guys on the next one.